Hi, my name is Brenda Prado. I am an HOD sophomore.
And I am Ryan Brigden, a junior at Phillips Academy. Thank you all for joining us for this first cross-campus forum on education.
We are joined by two district leaders, Mr. Jeffrey Riley, Superintendent and Receiver of the Lawrence Public Schools.
And John Palfrey, the head of school at Phillips Academy. Thank you both for coming here today to talk to us about these important issues.
Our first question today is for both of you. What is your favorite experience since starting your tenure of your current job?
Ooh, boy, I've had so many. I think for me, one of my favorite experiences was last June when we had a record number of high school students graduate. Lawrence has a reputation of having only half of the kids actually graduate within 4 years, and last year we had a tremendous number of students, well over 700, graduate in June, and our graduation rate is now at the highest it's ever been in the city.
It's amazing what you've done in Lawrence, Mr. Riley, and it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you to both of you for hosting this. I've been in this job just for 2 years, and actually my favorite moments have been ones where I've been directly teaching students within Phillips Academy. It's wonderful to be in a head of school job, but I really love the chance to be directly in a class, and some of you in this very room have been in the journalism class that Ms. Scott teaches, and I showed up unannounced one day, and that was a lot of fun. I was let in, but even despite having messed up that particular day, I've been allowed to be part of the hands-on teaching at school, and it's been really a wonderful experience.
Okay, thank you. So how have your views on the philosophy of education changed over the years?
Wow, that's a great question. I think early in my career there was such a focus on test scores, and what we've come to see is test scores are important and that certain standards have to be learned by all our students, but we also need to make sure our kids have opportunities for enrichment, whether it's robotics or the debate team or mock trial, sports, arts. Kids need to have a total well-rounded education, and that's something that I began to realize probably in the last 10 years. Many folks in the country today are so test score crazy that they forget about these important other opportunities that kids need to have to become well-rounded kids.
I think our system would be much better off if everybody shared that view, and I applaud you for making that such a public statement. I think for me, one of the areas where I've seen some change, at least in my own thinking, has been around the use of technology in the classroom. I continue to think there are huge advances that we can bring to the way in which kids are learning. I also think that there are opportunities that will be, in a way, the future of education that will blend both the residential and in-person kinds of education with technology. And I think those are where some of the most exciting new opportunities lie.
Thank you. To the next question.
So you guys, it costs roughly $70,000 for a year of an Andover education and $13,000 for a year of education in the Lawrence public school system. How does one relate the benefits of a certain type of education to the respective cost?
I didn't know it cost $70,000. What I would say is that irrespective of the cost, you can get a good education in many places in this country. I've seen great private schools, I've seen great public schools, I've seen great charter schools. Part of our philosophy when we came into Lawrence under receivership was that there are different ways to skin the cat, and regardless of how it gets done, we want good schools. Parents don't care about those kind of distinctions, they just want a good school for their kids. I was a product of a public school. My children go to the Boston public schools, but I've also seen great charter schools. I've seen great private schools, and I think no matter what kind of school it is, as long as it's of high quality, you've got to get it done. Now, in the question of finances, as a district, we are one of the more underfunded districts in the country, in the Commonwealth, and so we work really hard to write grants and try to raise money with foundations to make sure that our kids get what they need.
I don't think there's all that much correlation to the core of your question between the cost and the outcomes, honestly, in education. I think one of the distinctions between the cost of an Andover education in the sense of Phillips Academy and the average public school cost in high school is, of course, one is a residential experience. So we spend money on lots of things that schools don't, like your dormitories and meals. And even if you're a day student, you tend to spend much more time on campus and so forth. We also have two art museums, an art museum and an archaeology museum. And so forth. So I think the kind of thing that a private school is trying to accomplish is different, and that makes the cost structure different. But I think the key point is that teaching is actually primarily about a connection between kids and one another, and teachers and kids, and it's an emotional connection, and it's something that I think is not really about how much money you're spending. It's about the effectiveness of the interchange of ideas and the experiences. So while I think there's certainly some benefit to having more funds, it's certainly not a one-to-one correlation that you need to go to the school that spends the most money on a kid. The other thing I would note, just to be clear, is nobody pays $70,000 a year to go to Andover. In fact, it'd be helpful to us if some people did, but we are, first of all, a need-blind school, so kids are admitted only on the basis of merit, and then the families end up paying what they can according to a complex spectrum, and even the highest paying students are paying $47,000 a year, so everybody is being subsidized by an endowment.
What would you consider to be a world-class education? Is that accessible to everyone in today's world?
So I'm not sure a world-class education is accessible to everyone in the world. I think it is accessible to almost everyone in this country. And some of that is about how hard you work inside the school you're in. Some of that is about going out and finding opportunities beyond the school to get an education. The beauty of the technology that's arisen over the last 50 years is that the world is getting smaller. So even some parts of the world that may not have a strong educational system are now connected online. So information is much easier to get, and there is an ability to get a better education. Whether everyone has the same access to a world-class education, I'm not sure we're there yet, but it's something we're striving to get to.
I think if you were to imagine one thing that you could change in your lifetime, if you could increase the access to a world-class education for more kids, I can't think of anything that would be more important to do. And obviously that's happening in lots of great places here in this country and elsewhere as well. So, and I would say that within most school districts you can get a world-class education if you go after it, and that's certainly true in Lawrence, and I think it's certainly true at Phillips Academy. I do think that things like Khan Academy, which is one of the technological efforts that is a free and open effort. It was created with a mission statement explicitly by Sal Khan to create a world-class education for anyone, anywhere. It's a long way from doing that today, but I think that kind of concept where you can have some of the things taught at schools like ours that are provided as by some of our teachers at Phillips Academy in the calculus materials that could be accessible for free from anywhere. I think that's heading in the right direction for sure.
Thank you very much. On to the next question.
Looking to the future, what are the best and most realistic ways to equalize educational opportunity?
It's a great question. I look at it from the prism of what's happening in our country. We talk about America being a meritocracy, the idea that anyone can do or be anything if they work hard enough. But that actually only works if all kids have the same access to a high-quality education. I would argue in many cities across this country, kids don't have the same access as their suburban peers. When I was a principal in Boston, I spent a lot of time on the academics and the enrichment, and our kids, by the time we were done with them in 8th grade, were beating your average suburban kid on the MCAS test. And we felt like we gave them the same opportunity that suburban kids were getting. Despite challenges, we had a lot of special needs students. A lot of our students were learning English for the first time. Most of our students lived in poverty, but we think you actually can get it done if you really have a laser-like focus on what you're trying to get done.
Certainly agree with all of that, and I think that for independent schools as well as public schools, the emphasis needs to be on access to the front end. And are you recruiting from lots of communities where kids haven't traditionally gone to great schools necessarily, and create new pathways? Another thing I might highlight, though, that's a little bit off-center from this response is there are other kinds of institutions like libraries, I would point out, in our society that can help be pathways into great education and that can complement what's happening in schools. So I think our strategy should be holistic and think about, what are the other kinds of civic investments we're making that can be a helpful part of an education.
So you guys probably don't want to hear this, but in most of my life was spent without a computer, right? My daughter's in 3rd grade now, and when she wants to learn something, she tells me she goes to the Google, right? So it's just a very different world where you do have access to a lot of information. And so the question, I think, is going to be, how do we kind of mine that information in a way that's usable for kids so that they can digest it more easily and become really world-class learners.
Thank you. And on to our next one, please.
How do you see Andover and the Lawrence High School system collaborating in the future?
Well, I think there are lots of wonderful possibilities, and we'd love to do more than we do today. There are a series of different projects that are going on now. I'm reminded of the terrific work that Lou Bernieri, for instance, does with the Andover and Lawrence Breadloaf partnership, where we're working together on teaching and writing, as one of many examples that have been going on here for decades. But I think that there is much more that we could do in the future, and I think that's a worthy conversation for us to keep having.
I've been impressed by how many of our students from Lawrence are on the campus at Andover in the summer for different events after school. There's a real partnership that was developed long before either I or John was there, and we have met frequently. We're meeting again on Friday to kind of strengthen those ties and look for new things that we might be able to do.
Thank you very much. On to the next question.
What are ways that our two schools can interact without feeling like charity work by one or the other? In other words, what types of interactions can we promote that yield benefits for both schools?
I think one thing that is a really good example of that kind of bidirectionality is a Spanish language class that some of our students are involved in, that spends one day a week engaged in the Lawrence community, where we're, I think, having a very effective learning experience in a collaborative fashion, where I think there's no question but that the interaction is something that is leading to educational outcomes for kids, regardless of which school that they came from, and that are really improving the outcome, basically, by the collaboration. But I do think that as we think more about new educational models, in addition to what you might call that one an experiential model, as you think about how could we share teaching materials, how could we think about the hybrid learning experiences that we were talking about with technology, I think there are really attractive things that we could do together that would certainly be, again, bidirectional in that way.
And I think there's also an opportunity for service learning. There's so much community service work that needs to be done in both Andover and in Lawrence that kids are kids in my mind. And so if folks from both sides get together to work and help other people, I don't think that's considered charity for either group. It's about service to your community.
Thank you very much for those answers. And to the next question, please.
How might a relationship between LHS and Andover be expanded to include schools on state or even national level? Our two schools are geographically close to one another, but how can we communicate and share resources with other schools that are far away?
One thing I might suggest as a way to think about that is that I know that many other independent schools are trying to ask the same question that we are asking vis-a-vis Lawrence and Phillips Academy, which is to say, the Milton School, which is just outside a series of Boston neighborhoods, is asking the same question: how can we work more effectively and in a partnership? And so I think that effective work that we do here that has the either service learning aspect or an experiential learning aspect or a blended and technical approach that actually works and is helpful, that's something that others will have a real interest in. So that might be one way to think about it, which is just, is there a model that in fact can be something shared elsewhere? And I'm quite sure that when Mr. Riley is through with his work here in Lawrence in general, there will be a case study that says, how did you manage this extraordinary process of improvement in schools, and hopefully this will be a tiny chapter in that case study.
I also think that sometimes the adults feel like we have all the answers, and sometimes the best thing to do is to listen to the kids and just let the kids get together and talk and think about what projects they want to do. And especially as you get to middle and high school, where people are becoming young adults, we've got to start listening to the kids and what they want to do and what they need. It doesn't always have to be coming from us.
Thank you very much. On to the next question.
Schools act in loco parentis in place of parents. In what other aspects of a student's development should schools take on a greater role? How important is social, economic, emotional growth to a student's academic success?
Ooh, this is a great question. There's a great book out by Carol Dweck, and it's not very long. It might be 150 pages. And in it, what she's talking about is mindset and grit. And the idea is that it's the hard work that matters, not the actual end result. And that if you're a parent or a teacher, what you want to do is praise the hard work and not the end result. Because in life, we're going to always have times when we fail at things. But if you just keep working hard, that's the best way to achieve the best results all the time, rather than having a negative mindset where you think things are fixed. If you actually can work with students and teach them this growth mindset, I think our kids will be better off to a path of prosperity and a better life.
I think the research on grit and hard work is clearly one of the most important academic findings for education recently. The other thing I would note is with a school like ours that was founded in 1778, one of the things I love is the constitution of that school really still sort of speaks to this question about teaching kids not just about particular material. Imagine if we're still teaching what we taught in 1778, how ridiculous that would be. But it calls on us to teach both the minds and the morals of kids and to blend both knowledge and goodness together. And so in addition to giving kids the skills to succeed, I think we do have a job to teach ethics, to teach good decision making, to teach the kinds of life skills that in fact are the things that may make a big difference between someone being a successful person and someone being actually a good person in society, which are not always the same thing. And I think that's incumbent on us as teachers and as heads of institutions to try to both model that and to impart it to kids.
Thank you. Those are important answers. To the next question, please.
Okay. The next question is about how you guys as leaders make improvements in your school. Mr. Riley, some upperclassmen we have talked to say that the standards are too low. Is it possible to raise the standards? And if so, do you fear that some students might not give in?
So I guess when I came about 2 years ago, I did an assessment of the school district, and I found that among many things, we were not actually teaching the right standards. In many cases, we weren't teaching at a high enough rigor level. That is, we weren't challenging our students. And so I think while we did some major restructuring for the first 18 months, changing some principals, cutting down the size of central office, looking closely at some teachers we had concerns about, I think the real work is about increasing the rigor and what we're asking kids to do on a daily basis. And it doesn't mean that that's going to be out of the realm. You know, if a kid is struggling in school, it doesn't mean adding rigor to it is going to be impossible for them. What you want to do is engage kids. Too often in education we see just worksheets or you know, simple tasks, when what you really need to do is engage kids and let them be critical thinkers, let them be kinesthetically involved in their learning, because then it becomes real to folks and it becomes more meaningful. I'll give you one example. We started a school called Spark Academy, where kids intersperse high-quality fitness activities between their academic classes based on research that says that kids that raise their heart rate do better in school. The actual quote from the Harvard doctor is, "Exercise is the miracle grow for the brain." Well, we need to start thinking differently about how we educate kids. Sitting in a classroom all day, you know, looking at the teacher on the board, that only really services a small subset of kids, and we've got to find different ways to educate our kids.
Should we start doing some jumping jacks right now? It'll make the program better.
We can absolutely do that. I might speak better.
Oh, that's so good. Right? Push-ups? I don't know. What do you want?
Whatever you want. I'm not afraid. I'm a little afraid, but.
Thank you very much. Any follow-up questions?
Well, so Mr. Palfrey, what does improvement look like at Andover? Do you think Andover has room for improvement as well?
Goodness, yes, of course it has room for improvement. It would be a boring job if it didn't, for certain. So I think that the kinds of challenges at a school like Phillips Academy are different clearly than in other contexts, in the sense that I don't think raising standards is our primary challenge. I actually think most of the kids who come to Phillips Academy have such incredible inner drive that in some times I'd like you actually to take some time off and to do some things other than do all of your homework. And that is an unusual thing to say, but I think we really do need to teach, for instance, wellness and balance, and to make sure that the kinds of stresses that kids bring and some of the psychological costs that come with those are things that we have to be able to address and to help kids accomplish a better sense of balance and wellness. That actually might line up exactly with what Mr. Riley was talking about with athletics or sports. There may be lots of ways in which we could get kids to perform very, very well, but also not have the same level of stress. So that's certainly one that I would like to see us address. But I also think there's much more that we could do in terms of improving the teaching and learning on our campus. And again, I think it's very similar to what Mr. Riley said, although from a slightly different angle, which is I believe that kids learn in lots of different ways. And I think even though at a little school like Phillips Academy we have 300 courses in the course catalog, that doesn't mean that we're using all the possible and I think increasingly cool teaching techniques that we might in order to reach engage students in lots of different ways. So I applaud the kinds of things that our teachers are doing to make learning more experiential, or to use technology in new ways, or to experience different ways of putting kids into problem-solving teams and so forth. But there's just much, much more that we could do. And the other piece I would say that I think we could and should do more of is, as a school that attracts 1,129 kids from all around the world, as sort of a global magnet school, I think we could do much more about getting our students to have global and local experiences outside of their comfort zone. So whether that means a student who's a day student from Methuen spending time in China over the summer, or it's a kid who's come from China spending time in Lawrence over the course of the school year, I think we could do much more to broaden the horizons of our kids and to prepare them for a global economy. So those are a few of the things I'd love to see us do, but there are much room for improvement, and many fronts on which we're working hard.
We'll be back for more after this.
Think before you send.
Bullying can take many forms. One of the meanest is cyberbullying. Texting, email, Facebook, and Twitter are all relentless and can cause anguish and desperation. See what it can do.
Hi, I'm Megan. You just saw me as the victim of cyberbullying. This happens in many schools all the time. Don't be part of the problem, be part of the solution. Think before you send.
Welcome back. I'm Ryan Brigden, a junior from Phillips Academy, Andover.
And I'm Brenda Prado, an HOD sophomore, and we're going to ask Riley and Palfrey a couple more questions.
You both have students who will be the first in their families to go to college. Do you consider college the best option for any student, and how do you work to ensure these students have success?
So I think college is certainly a great option for our students to get through. I would also say, though, we've had kids be successful going into the military. We've had kids be successful in the trades. And what we're trying to do in Lawrence is get our kids to a place where when they do graduate, they're able to take any of those tracks that they see fit.
I think for kids coming out of Phillips Academy, the vast majority, basically everyone, does go to college. Some certainly have gone to the military as part of their training. I think that for kids who have excelled academically and who have an interest in that, I think college is a fantastic thing to do. But I do think that whether or not you're a first-gen to college family, or you've been coming from family that's been going to college for many, many generations, I think thinking broadly about what you're trying to get out of college and thinking about more than just a few potential college options is actually very important. And there are many more effective college and university options today than there were even a generation ago. So I would appeal to parents and to students, particularly at Phillips Academy, to think beyond the handful of colleges that you may think are the great ones, and think about other kinds of options for that stage of your career. I also am a big believer, by the way, in taking gap years, especially if you've been studying very intensively up through 12th grade, and taking some time to do something else, whether it's service or learning or other kinds of breaks before you go on to college.
Thank you. And on to the next question.
What is the biggest challenge in your job?
The biggest challenge in my job? So my job is an interesting job. We have almost 13,000 students, approximately 30 schools, depending on how you code them. I think what was the hardest part in the beginning was letting people see that there is incredible quality inside the school system. The media and other folks had such a negative impression of Lawrence that a lot of people, I think, were down. And the reality is we had a tremendous amount of talent, and we have great people, administrators, teachers, parents inside the city. And this past year, when our test scores had improved markedly, and we were, if not the most improved or one of the most improved school districts in Massachusetts, I think people began thinking about the school system with more pride. And that's pretty exciting, but there's a lot more work to do.
I have quite a different kind of a job. I have just one school to be responsible for and 1,100 kids, so a much, much smaller scale. I think the most immediate challenge year to year is doing the fundraising that allows us to stay a need-blind school and ensuring that we have the kind of support that allows us to admit kids from wherever they come in the world and to give them a great education for free. And when you are an independent school, you just have to do that every year, and that means raising more than $10 million a year from our alumni and families. So that's sort of an immediate goal. And if we don't do that, we can't live up, I think, to our ultimate ideals. But I also think, in a broader sense, the challenge for Phillips Academy is to make as much as we can of the amazing resources and platform that we have, and to live up to the ideals of a school that's dedicated to non-SIBI, or not for self. So that's related to the fundraising challenge, but it's also related to sharing the educational wealth that we have and the great teachers, and supporting them in fundamental ways.
Thank you. Up to the next question.
Hi. We've been talking a little bit about how students might connect in places that are far apart from one another. And Mr. Riley, you mentioned that the power to connect should be with the students. And Mr. Poffer, you mentioned that technology might be used as a tool for this sort of thing. So do either of you have any ideas of specific ways technology might be implemented so that kids are able to connect themselves?
This is a slightly off the question, but I just remember last year when there were some of our students who wanted to do an AP Physics course, and there was no course here at the high school, so we were able to arrange for a virtual AP Physics course where kids could go online and work on it there with kids from across the country. We're in kind of a new frontier, and the thing with technology that's interesting is that in many times the students are the teachers and the adults are the learners. And so that's a unique situation where kids know more about technology than many of the adults. And so we have to kind of rely heavily on the students to let us know what works and what doesn't work. And kids have the best detectors in the world about what's right and what's not right. So I think that's a place where we can lean heavily on.
So I think this is exactly the right frame of reference, is to figure out, what are the teaching and learning opportunities that we have using technology, and often letting kids help us determine that and to figure out what's going to be successful. I think one thing that we know is that the approach of just having one person who's the sort of sage on the stage at the front of a room and lecturing to 20 or 30 or 40 kids and having them absorb a certain amount of information is not the best way to teach almost anything. And there is some value certainly in some people lecturing for some period of time, but fundamentally, whether that's in a video or that's actually done in a room, that's not a great way to teach or to learn. I think there are lots of ways that we now know the technology can help improve that, and there are lots of ways that you can do it without technology as well, just to be very clear. I think adaptive learning is certainly one of those areas, which is to say, take mathematics as an example. As a student is working along in a particular progression within mathematics, you can imagine if you've got a group of 20 kids, they're at different places in their progression on any given day. And one of the challenges for any teacher is, do you teach to the middle of that group, a little bit to the lower end, do you teach to the higher end, and so forth? And I actually think technology can allow different kids to be at different places in their learning at any given time in a classroom. It's a very simple concept, but one that I think would allow for teachers to have a different role in the classroom, so that kids are working at different paces, going for more mastery-based approaches, and then the teachers will have a different role, which is helping kids where they are, and less trying to lead the entire group at the same level. Another thing I would note, though, is akin to what Mr. Riley said about teaching AP Physics. One of the areas that we can't teach everybody exactly what they want is in less commonly taught languages. An example would be Arabic, where we have a small handful of kids for every year at Phillips Academy who want to take Arabic, and if we were to take a certain amount of money, say $100,000, to devote that to Arabic teaching for a small number of students, that's obviously not viable in the long run. But if you were to team up with a series of different schools and have one Arabic course taught very, very well using technology, but also one teacher who could be coordinating these kids using technology, I think you could actually have lots of kids learning Arabic. That might be true in lots of different fields. So I think you could expand curricula very well using technology in that sense too.
And what you've seen for well over 100 years in this country is the kind of broad brush teaching where a teacher gets up in front of the class, teaches the 25 students, some of the kids get it, some of the kids don't, and then we walk out the door. What we're moving towards with this new technology is the personalization of learning and education. And this is going to explode over the next 10 or 20 years. The question is, who's going to be able to personalize it best? Because right now there aren't that many great companies out there that can do this kind of differentiated learning that we need, but I think you're going to see that exploding in the coming years.
Thank you. So now on to our next question.
You mentioned, Mr. Riley, that students are teachers in a lot of situations, and that is definitely more true than ever at Andover, especially in humanities courses. A lot of technology involves only science courses like physics and math, and breaching that gap in involving students in discussion, recreating that learning situation where discussion takes the front stage in technology. Is that foreseeable in the future? And does Andover or Lawrence High see any initiatives that we can take in breaching the long distance gap in humanities courses?
Well, I think that the use of technology in humanities courses is quite different than the use of technology in things like science or mathematics or computer science or language. And actually I think in those first four that I just mentioned, it's actually pretty straightforward in terms of the value of it. And I think we're learning lots of things about that. I think when it comes to something like English and history, the mode of employing technology is quite different. I would say if you're reading, for instance, Moby Dick, or you're reading slave narratives, or you're reading any number of different works from American history as texts, there's not that much that technology does in the basic sense to improve that conversation. If you have a wonderful group of students who have a wonderful text and a room and a teacher who can do a little bit of scaffolding around it, that's an amazing way to teach that particular text. However, I do think that digital humanities, which has been the notion of bringing in really exciting artifacts or images or texts into the learning environment, is a way that you don't necessarily have to go to the National Archives or the Smithsonian or to a local historical archive in order to bring really interesting things into that conversation about those slave narratives or about Moby Dick, for instance. So it might just be thinking about it slightly differently, but to the extent that you can have a great teacher and a relatively small number of kids discussing a text or thinking through something in a classic way, there's no reason to throw out something that actually works really beautifully and is about that fantastic teaching moment that people remember their whole lives.
I think that's right, and there's always going to be room for discussion and reading. There are things that technology is not the savior necessarily, but it is a tool that can be used, when used effectively, can really personalize learning. You've actually seen some schools in the Silicon Valley do away with a lot of technology because they felt like their students were so technologically savvy that they just needed to focus on the basics. And then they would be able to then take their technological prowess and use that as they went forward outside of school. So technology is a tool that teachers need to learn to use better, but I think you're never going to be able to get away from a school function.
I think the key thing is to say, does the technology serve a pedagogical focus, a teaching and learning focus? So you have to ask the question first, what problem are you trying to solve? And if the technology is part of that, great. If it's not, it should not be there, and it actually can get in the way.
Thank you. Any follow-up questions?
So we've heard a lot about the importance of something like critical thinking and how that's how teaching critical thinking is really what's important, and how kind of the stereotypical method of teaching, whether it's through lectures or through through worksheets, kind of this rote learning method, is not really effective. So how do you propose, whether through technology or through typical classroom learning like in-person discussion, I guess, how do you propose, or what do you think is the best way to teach something like critical thinking, which is a bit undefined?
So what I would say is there's an important work out there called The Skillful Teacher, and it has a pyramid, and it discusses many things on the different aspects of teaching, but it calls out the kind of hierarchy of educational needs where critical thinking is at the top and kind of the more basic learning is at the bottom. And what we need to do is give teachers that information that when they formulate their lessons, we have to go beyond the kind of the rote basic teaching and infuse, whether that's compare and contrast, Venn diagrams, using multiple sources of information to make an argument, to make sure that kids have a higher rigor level in their classes.
So I think there's a technological answer and a non-technological answer to that question. One on the non-technological front is, I just think we need to encourage students to be critical of the information that they receive. So critical thinking in part is first saying, I don't just receive the information, but I am skeptical of it. And actually, I think one thing that's wonderful about working with teenagers in the high school context is they tend to be skeptical. So I think it's actually encouraging this skepticism. When I get essays from students that are critical of ideas, I just want to make sure those are well argued, right? I want to make sure that you've got really good arguments and really good facts that actually support it. It's much like the work that many of you do in these journalism classes, which is, when you're writing an article, it's great to be critical of the source or the topic, but it's actually got to be well reasoned. So I think there are many things, and I think that can be taught through lots and lots of different disciplines. And it's not just English and the history or other humanities. I think it's got to be done in the sciences too. Not to accept received wisdom. But on the technological front, I actually think it's just as important to teach kids the same form of critical thinking and skepticism in the digital environment with the technology as central to it. And the reason for that is that with today's information environment, there are many, many, many more sources than there were before. So anybody can write a blog or a Wikipedia entry or create an Instagram or a Tumblr or whatever it is, and the credibility of that information may well be suspect. And I think actually having the ability to assess a Wikipedia entry and determine whether that's a good one, and some of them are the best possible sources, particularly about sciences, or a lousy one, often about politics, they're really, really bad. But how do you make that assessment, and how do you actually participate in improving one of those things online? So I actually think there's some really interesting new media literacies that have to do with critical thinking that we don't often teach, but that could be taught across almost any discipline and be really effective.
Well, thank you very much. And any more follow-up questions?
Yes, I have a question for you, Mr. Riley. I'm a teacher at Phillips Academy, and one of the things that we do every single day is we ask our kids, do you know how to learn? That happens in the classroom. Do you know how to work hard? That happens at night when they're doing their homework. And do you know that we care about you and that we are behind you, we believe in you? And that often happens later in the evening, at sports, in the afternoons, on Sundays. It's a great advantage to a residential school, and it's a piece that's priceless. And I wonder how you see society providing that piece to a public school when your kids aren't there all day, and when you might not have the funds to have as many teachers per kid as we do?
Well, I would say that we are one of the few school systems in the country that has actually adopted an expanded learning time model. So all of our students get a longer school day in the K-8 space. The high schoolers were able to escape that, apparently, because they do sports and they have jobs, and I mean there's different reasons for it. But what I would say is we believe deeply that if you provide kids with an opportunity, both an academic opportunity and the high quality enrichment, that kids will flourish. And so when I came to this school district, the arts and sports and enrichment opportunities have been whittled way down. The focus was almost solely on test scores. And we started changing that mindset. And we added time, but then we also added things like intramurals for middle school kids. We added an art show that's going to happen at the end of this year. Our PFA is doing In the Heights, this Friday. And so we want to make sure our kids have that well-rounded experience. And surprisingly, or not surprisingly, when we did that, the test scores started going up because kids don't always come to school just for the school aspect of it. You have to have hooks for kids. I myself didn't always go to school just for school. In fact, I didn't really become a learner until I got to college. And so you have to have those other opportunities for kids to be involved.
One of the impressive things I think about the movement toward more time in schools, which you've been a leader of and our friend Chris Gabrielli and others have on a national level, is that despite the evidence being so clear that more time does lead to better learning outcomes in virtually every setting, that often it's been suburban and wealthier school districts that haven't wanted to do it. And actually some of the less well-resourced school districts have been the ones who have taken this leap and are providing those benefits to kids. So I think it's one of these great sort of unexpected stories in some respects, but will lead to enormous gains.
And we have one last follow-up question.
I'd like to thank both of you for coming. One question I had was, with these wonderful students in front of you, what would you challenge them to do as a piece of their education and also as members of your respective schools?
Would you like the last word or second to last word?
I'll have the penultimate word.
All right, that sounds good. Thank you. You can go first. I go first. All right, sounds good. Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you so much to all of you for inviting us. This has been a lot of fun and the highlight of my day for sure. I would say that the main thing I would say is to students is go change the world. I think you can. I know that I've been so inspired by students I've met from the Lawrence School District as well as from our school at Phillips Academy, and I believe in you. And I think that the best part of critical thinking is actually then translating that into leading a good and fulfilling life. Not good just for yourself, but also good for the community, and to lean into being a citizen. And in fact, if people, I think, took a more engaged role in their democracies, we would have a much stronger country and a much stronger world than we do today. And I think that critical thinking will serve you well in ways that will be remunerative, and you'll earn money and support your family well with it. But I think ultimately you'll make the world a better place, and I hope you do better than we've done.
I think what I'd say is academics are critical going forward, being prepared for what we call the real world, whether that's post-secondary education, work, the military. But after that, when you become a young adult, really what happens is it really depends on how hard you work in that chosen field. And hard work matters. And anyone that tells you otherwise is not telling you the truth. And so find something you love and work really hard at it, and think about other people. And if you do those things, I think you're going to be fine.
On behalf of the journalism programs at both schools, we'd like to thank you most sincerely for your time and dedication to your students.